Welcome to the World Class Coaching Podcast, where we promote the constant pursuit of development and focus on what really counts towards improving performance in elite sport. I'm Matt Dickens, and this is episode 3 of the World Class Coaching Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Chris Bishop, lecturer at Middlesex University. We discuss the importance of students getting practical experience alongside their studies, how Chris has looked at various movement screens to enhance the FMS with the use of high-velocity movements, and he gives some great advice for anyone else aspiring to get their work published too. Okay, today's guest is Chris Bishop. He's a lecturer at Middlesex University, and I'm going to hand you straight over for him to tell you how he got to where he is today.
Lovely, thanks, Matt. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. So in terms of where I've kind of come from, I guess my first real taste of strength and conditioning work goes back sort of to about 2007. And 2007, I was actually a personal trainer in one of the David Lloyd centres, and Luton Town Football Club, who were in League One then. They were coming to use the gym quite frequently, and then the head of sports science would come in, see what I was doing, have a bit of a chat with me, and I ended up getting brought on as a performance consultant for them throughout that season. So that's kind of where my first taste into S&C really was. And as it happens, at the end of the season, that was Luton going into administration, and unfortunately my services got cut. Which is obviously, as a consultancy service, is probably the first thing to go when something like that happens. But ultimately, I kind of really enjoyed my time doing that. And I thought to myself, look, maybe working with athletes is probably the area I want to move forward in. So I kind of left the personal training side of things and went to work for a company which is now called Optimum Healthcare Solutions. And Optimum Healthcare Solutions, I guess, the best thing I can do is like them to a company like Exos or the National Academy of Sport Medicine. You know, they kind of cover everything in the sense that it's primarily a physiotherapy-based company, but they have departments for occupational therapy, they have departments for personal training, and they also had a performance side of the business, which I headed up. So for maybe sort of 4 years or so, I was heading up the S&C for Optimum, and built up a few contracts, private consultancy contracts, and had a pretty decent selection of athletes, mainly in swimming and track and field, that I built up at both an elite and a sub-elite level. And then kind of 2010, end of 2010, I've done my UKSCA accreditation, and that's all done. And then I kind of think to myself that perhaps I should probably go and get my master's degree. That seems to be more and more appearing on job specs out there now. So went to Middlesex University, and 2011, 2012 did my master's in strength and conditioning under Anthony Turner. And I guess to tell you how I got to where I am now, what happened was Anthony often invites one person at the end of each academic year to come and do an internship under him at the university. And I put my name forward for it, and he kindly invited me in. And he kind of said, look, you know, the internship can be whatever you want it to be. You know, we can set you up with scholarship athletes, you can help do some coaching on the practical side of things. And I said, well, you know, I've got my athletes outside of here, and I'm pretty happy with that. What I'd really like to do is, you know, get involved in some lecturing. And so my internship effectively turned into a lectureship. And I was delivering lectures on the third year undergraduate S&C module. I was helping out on the master's program, or his master's program as well. So the following year, they then invited me to do some part-time hours for them. So I must have not been too terrible. And I became a part-time lecturer at Middlesex. And then that progressed last year into a full-time position, came up, and I was fortunate enough to get it. And that's kind of the whirlwind tour, if you like, of taking you to where I am today.
Oh, nice. So you've gradually transitioned from full-time S&C coach, as it were, to part-time lecturer, part-time both, and now full-time lecturing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that still, we still do bits and pieces in terms of consultancy, because I think it's very, very important that as a lecturer, we still keep our hand in the coaching field. That's extremely important, because I think that adds credibility to our role. I think a lecturer who does no coaching in the field is probably a very quick to get gunned to a certain extent. So I think it's pretty important that we do keep our hand in that, and we do that. So I've kind of kept my hand in with some of the GB sprinters that come to study at Middlesex. We've got a fantastic relationship with the head of athletics at Oakland's College in St Albans. It's basically pretty much a sporting college, and they have just the most incredible abundance of GB track and field athletes at a junior level there. They're everywhere, and it's because people like Jonas Dudu helps do coaching down there, and the head of athletic development, Ryan Freckleton, who I know very well, I've got a good relationship with. So I've managed to keep my ties into the coaching side of things with working with primarily, a couple of the GB track athletes that come to study at Middlesex, which is nice.
I really like the fact that you said that, to be honest, because personally, I think it's massively important, the whole practical side of things. And obviously, you're lecturing towards the next generation of strength and conditioning coaches. But for the majority of them, I guess they're not going to be based in university all their lives. They're going to be the ones out in the field. So the more experience that you can hand on about that, then surely the
Yeah,
better.
absolutely. Yeah, exactly. I think that's essential. The guys is all well and good making sure that they can deliver, like a hypothetical 3-month case study that maybe we set up as an assessment, which is, tries to reflect in line with a UKSCA accreditation. And everyone, provided you do enough reading and you understand the principles of periodization, anyone can do that, right? But then being able to implement that in the fields with a GB track athlete, or on an internship in an academy that you get some responsibility for, is a completely different story, isn't it, as you know? So I think it's making sure they have the best of both worlds is probably, particularly for budding coaches and students, it's absolutely essential.
Oh, totally. Always like your case study is always going to be the best case scenario, as it were. It doesn't enter at all the challenges that you face in the field, technical coaches, like athletes. I'll tell you what, I can give you an example. I had an athlete yesterday who started his moped with flip flops on and ripped his whole big toenail off his foot, and that
Oh God.
and now can't do well. Now obviously I'll have to adapt the program, especially just so that he's doing exercises that he can do. But it's kind of things like that that you don't expect when you're at university, you know.
No, exactly. Very important. The adaptability is one of the key concepts, isn't it? That you're going to need to be able to implement, and that's something you can't teach in a classroom. Something that only comes with experience, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. So whilst we're on the whole practical side of things, I've got to say, Chris, like your name obviously crops up a few times over the last few years in the UKSCA journal. You've put quite a few articles out there, sort of thing. One of the things that I really like about the articles that you write and the whole Middlesex team write, is that there's always practical implications for strength and conditioning coaches. Like it seems like you approach the subjects area more from the coach's point of view rather than a researcher. Like, would you say that's true? And is it a deliberate approach?
Um, yeah, it's a good question, actually. I guess if I jump straight to the answer, so I'm not giving you a politician's answer straight away. The answer is there probably is some deliberate intention to write some of these articles from a coach's standpoint, and I think that's an essential. It's an essential aspect of writing a review article. So. Um, for particularly for students, and up and coming coaches who may not know this, there are a number of different types of academic publications. But two of the main types would be articles that consist of primary research that appear in journals like the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, Journal of Sports Sciences, places like that. Or there are review papers or review publications, as you said, which typically are found in the Strength and Conditioning Journal and or UKSCA journal. Now, these journals may have a slightly, should we call, lower impact factor because they don't consist of any primary research. But the truth of the matter is that they're probably more readily accessed by the masses. And ultimately, the articles or these review publications are probably read, particularly by up and coming students, by more people, because it's probably easier for a student to, let's say, pay £60 to be an associate member of the UKSCA and get their 4 quarterly journals a year than it is to access something like, the British Journal of Sports Medicine if the university database doesn't have access to that particular journal or something like that, as an example. So, I think it's very, very important that review articles, because they don't contain any primary research, they have to have something tangible for the reader to take away. And that usually comes in the form of a practical application section, like you said. Now, I guess to give you an example, the first ever article I wrote towards the very end of 2013 was entitled Strength and Conditioning for Sprint Swimming, which was published in the Strength and Conditioning Journal. And the article started off with a theoretical component to it. It looks at the needs analysis of the sport. So we were investigating biomechanics and physiology and injury analysis from all the available literature. But once this had been covered, I then proposed a possible physical testing battery. Okay, so that coaches might consider using that for monitoring progress within their sprint swimmers. And then I gave an example or a couple of example programs, a strength and a power program that I had, kind of based some of my training with some of the swimmers that I had been seeing. So I had a swimming contract before I started at Middlesex. Now, ultimately, if the article didn't have the testing battery and the program sections to it, there wouldn't really have been any, real guidelines or anything tangible for the reader to take away. So, this notion of, attacking your article, particularly your review articles, from a coach's perspective is, as you say, I think absolutely imperative.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it's great you take that approach. If we continue with the same theme then of practical application, why don't we discuss your latest article? It's titled Assessing Movement Using a Variety of Screening Tests. Am I right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So basically, it's around the subject of how we can enhance the functional movement screen using velocity-based assessments. To me, this is a really interesting topic because one of the biggest criticisms that comes up of the FMS is its lack of distinction between high threshold and low threshold motor control, and thus it kind of brings into question the whole relevance towards specific sporting actions, because most sporting actions are high force or high velocity. Do you want to tell me a little bit about your approach and tell the listeners a little bit about the guidelines and what you did within the review, just if they haven't read the article yet?
Yeah, sure. Listen, the whole FMS thing is a super interesting one, in my opinion. It's come under pretty heavy scrutiny, as I'm sure a lot of people will be aware, in the last 5 to 6 years. There's been an abundance of studies, surrounding whether or not the FMS is able to ascertain a relationship between athletic performance or its ability to predict injury. And these are two absolutely pivotal areas for the S&C professional, right? So it's very, very important. Now, bottom line is it's kind of been shown that it can't really do either. But I do feel a little bit for the FMS because what many people might not know is that it was never meant to do any of those things. It was designed by Gray Cook, who, as I understand it, extremely intelligent man. He's worked in professional sport in the NFL as a physical therapist. And all he wanted to do was create a grading system for, baseline movement quality, which is basically what it is. Now, researchers have kind of jumped on this notion and they're trying to assess its relationship with performance and injury prediction because it has a numerical grading system. Now, that makes it really easy to run statistics against it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think it does also need to be remembered that it was never really meant for that purpose. However, having said all of that, if people are going to try and assess this relationship and find that, maybe there isn't one, we need to try and understand why. And there might be a whole host of reasons for this. And you kind of touched on it in your questioning, but my article kind of suggests that the FMS perhaps can't have, particularly when we're concerned about injury prediction, perhaps can't, predict future injury if none of the tests assess movement at high velocity. And I think that's key. Sport is played at high velocity, at high speeds. Nearly every sporting action I can think of is governed by a finite period of time. Um, and ultimately, I think we need to assess at high velocity if we want to stand any chance of identifying whether or not an athlete is at risk of injury or non contact injury. So I proposed a few screening methods which are out there in the literature that might be able to help us with this and not necessarily replace the FMS, just maybe create a more fuller screening picture, if you like. So the first of them was the landing error scoring system, or the LESS test. And okay, for any listeners that don't know, the landing error scoring system is a test designed to assess an athlete's jump landing mechanics. So they stand on a box, they have to jump off the box and then essentially perform a drop jump. Okay. But the distance, as I remember from reading the literature, when they land by jumping off the box initially, the platform they have to land on is set at 50% of that individual's height away from the box that they're stood on. So rather than just doing a drop jump where you would step down and just jump up immediately directly in front of the box, you have to jump forward a bit, effectively 50% of your height, and then do a drop jump, as it were. And you're assessing a whole host of criteria, okay, such as foot positioning, do the feet land at exactly the same time? You're looking at knee alignment, you're looking at the amount of flexion, you're looking at the torso angle, all that kind of thing. And the beauty of the LESS test is that it has been shown in research that it is able to differentiate between people who have and have not had ACL trauma. So that's quite a useful indicator. Now, that being said, it may have been able to identify or differentiate between the two because a specific study has chosen to look at that, whereas the other two assessments I'm going to talk about in a second haven't, or to my knowledge, there hasn't been a study that's looked at that yet. So the single leg landing assessment is a second option. Okay, I think the article that I refer to the most is by the lead author was Jones, but I also think that Lee Harrington, who is a fantastic physiotherapist up at the University of Salford in Manchester, was on the paper as well. And effectively, it's like a drop land, but on one leg. And they were looking at the relationship between single leg landing mechanics, knee valgus, and cutting during a change of direction movement task. And if I recall correctly, I don't think there was masses and masses of correlations between cutting mechanics and the single leg landing assessment. But what they did note, if I remember correctly, is that those people who did perform poor cutting techniques also perform poorly on the single leg landing assessment. And the advantage of that one that the LESS test doesn't have is that it's looking at landing mechanics unilaterally, because very rarely do we probably in sport land perfectly bilaterally, do we? Because, particularly in field and court sports, everything is so reactive in nature. And then the third one is a tuck jump assessment by Greg Meyer, who we saw at the UKSCA conference. And clear that guy is on another level of intelligence compared to most of us, isn't it? But he basically, you perform repeated tuck jumps repeatedly for 10 seconds, and it allows you again to look at landing mechanics, and this time perhaps look at landing mechanics under fatigue because it's repeated for 10 seconds rather than a single effort, so to speak. And what I liked about, well, obviously I liked it because I put the article together, so I'm biased, but The message I try to put across in terms of a practical application is that we can use the FMS if we know how to use it and just use it for baseline movement quality. But if we want to add some of these high velocity screening methods as well, it might give us a slightly better indication as to which athletes might be predisposed to potential non-contact injury risk. And so the single leg landing assessment could potentially be used as a progression from the less test if someone masters the less test. And similarly, the tuck jump assessment could be a progression on even further. So we're getting almost like a continuum of enhanced neuromuscular control if our athletes continue to perfect, the previous test, if that makes sense.
So I guess what you're saying also, or what you're alluding to, is sometimes if we practice the test, we just get better at the test rather than.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. There's a notion that isn't there. I think it was to use that exact point to go back to the FMS. I believe the author was David Frost, who was trying to decipher whether or not changes in the FMS score were actually real changes in the FMS score. I think he's done quite a few articles on the FMS with firefighters. And I think, one of the notions was we test them on the FMS score, but as soon as you know what's coming, debatably, you could test them the next day and they might score better because there's a notion of you can recall what you did, and there's a notion of perception, or if no one's ever done it before, then maybe you've opened up a neuromuscular pathway to that particular pattern. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Personally, something I see, if you spend 5 minutes, if you give it to an athlete and tell them to do it, chances are they're going to do it poorly. If you spend 5 minutes coaching it, you can increase the effectiveness of that test dramatically.
Yeah.
So then I guess it comes down to your ability as a coach to kind of learn from these tools as you start to build your own system, which I think is the most important thing, right?
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. If you were to use again, your screening methods like the FMS as a baseline for movement quality, and then once they score above a certain level, but you are also critiquing each test individually rather than taking the sum score, which is one of the huge criticisms of the FMS. Then you may say, well, actually, maybe we should have progressions from these tests, and if we take the deep squat in the FMS as an example, I think there is so much that can be done with the overhead squat as a screening method, which no one's really done yet, to be honest with you. I'm sure people do it, it's just not been put in the literature. And that is to say, we can just get someone to perform an overhead squat just as a body weight movement pattern, see how they move. If someone does it perfectly, we need a branch, a feed off branch to say, okay, does that mean we can just load them up and start teaching them to snatch straight away? Maybe, maybe not. How are we going to progress that further? Maybe we should add a little bit of load. Okay, well, let's add a little bit of load and let's get them performing the overhead squat with a bar, or some light load. Okay, great. It's absolutely perfect now. How are we going to progress that further? Well, we've added load. Maybe we should add speed. So maybe your overhead squat becomes a loaded overhead squat, and then it becomes a snatch balance. And it's basically the same exercise. You've just adapted it twice. And that was another thing that has come out of, I believe, one of Frost's research articles was that, the FMS may be great at identifying asymmetries and pain for within those 7 particular tasks. But actually what it's missing is progression and roots. And I think, that's what you're alluding to in terms of by creating your own system, maybe you use something as a baseline and then you say, okay, but if we have step 2 and 3 for these particular tests, then we can really have a better idea if their movement quality is not only good at baseline, but at good under load and good under speed or something to that effect.
Yeah, massively. Like, I think that's a really, really good point. And there's so many variables that make every situation unique. One of the other things I really liked about the article is some of the tests involve like video capture, which I think is becoming increasingly easy for coaches to use now that everyone's got an iPad or a phone with an app like Coach's Eye, or I think even now the latest iPhones, not that I've got one, has like a slow motion video capture on it as well.
Probably, yeah.
So I think it's that sort of thing's becoming easier. But even like the way you sum up the article, just to say like don't forget the coach's eye. Like your own eye is probably the most valuable tool that you can have as a coach. And yes, we're going to put, when you first meet your athletes, you're going to put them through a screening process because you need to know, understand how they move. But really, every time you work with those athletes, is going to be another screen. Like, are they going to do a squat, a bodyweight squat, and a lunge or an overhead squat in their warm up every day? Using these tests that you've talked about, landing mechanics, etc., and just watching that within every training. Training equals screening, screening equals training. That kind of philosophy. The reason I like the way the Middlesex team approach these articles is there is always that practical application kind of side of things. Yeah, so no, I thought I should mention that, and yeah, no, well done.
No, no, thank you. Listen, it's very nice of you to say so. I've got to be honest and give him a bit of a shameless plug. That was actually one of the things that we added into the second draft when we submitted the paper. That I've got to give him a plug. Anthony Turner, read the paper for me, and then he kind of said, "Listen, is it worth us thinking about putting this in about the coach's eye?" And he said, you could even entitle that section "The Coach's Eye," because we know there's an app called that, and that immediately would grab people's attention. So it was quite a clever idea from him, and it was because it's so orientated around practical application. It wasn't so much about, oh, here's a reference for this, or this is what the literature says. Like you says, it was very much, you know, this job is about people. We were fortunate enough a couple of months ago to get Duncan French down to do a CPD day for us down at Middlesex. And I'm a huge fan. I think he's probably one of the best, if not the best, in our country. And he's done everything. And he was saying, this job's about people. It's about people getting the most out of people. So if you're relying too heavily on an inflexible system, or you're relying too heavily on data, then when it comes down to the bread and butter, which is you delivering that session to the athlete or to the team, are they going to respond to you if you've effectively lost the ability to communicate, or if you've lost that rapport that ultimately the whole thing is built upon? That's essentially the foundation, isn't it? And so that's kind of, that little final section, that article is a little piece of that, if you like, from that perspective.
Yeah, it's funny you say that as well, because I obviously, after reading your article, I jumped straight onto Ian Jeffries about managing the ecosystem, which is in the same journal. And one of the first things he says is, like, you can have the best training program in the world, but if you've got a bad relationship or bad rapport, like it's not going to be anywhere near as effective as if your athletes buy into it, the coaches are on the same like continuum or in the same direction, and if everyone's working towards the same goals, then that's what really counts at the end of the day.
Yeah, very much so. And it's, I tell you what, someone I've just put you in touch with over Twitter recently, Rob Walsh. He is massive on this. He is, and I firmly believe we have very similar thought processes on what I'm about to say, Walshy and myself. And that is that you could have the exact same program delivered by two different coaches or two different people, and ultimately you could get massively different results. And he was really, he was head of performance at Harrow School before he took his job out in the Netherlands. And he basically, was saying it's about the delivery from the coach, and that's why his big thing is that you've got all these private schools now offering, S&C jobs and kind of jumping on that bandwagon, which I think is fantastic, by the way. I really, really do. But Walshy's big thing was, if you're only going to offer 8 grand and, 3 meals a day, you might not get someone as good as you think. You will attract a better quality of coach if you, one, offer the right money, but ultimately, if you do attract the right coach for the right package, you're going to get massively different results because it's about the delivery. And that comes down to, experience. And that's something that we're always trying to get across to our students. It's the experience and it's the delivery that gets enhanced through that experience that will ultimately, make the difference. I'm a very firm believer that, the tiny, most subtle changes in exercise technique, whether it be a lift or whether it be something technical on the field, can, bring about monumental changes if they are done, in a cumulative amount repeatedly over again and again and again. Because essentially the worst thing you can do is, allow poor motor patterning to be continually done and be continually done under load and or speed, right?
I completely agree. Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. If I move on to our last question then, or just like kind of the last thread of this main content, basically, like there's a lot of coaches out there at the moment, like young coaches coming out of university, doing bachelors, doing master's degrees. It would be really nice for a lot more people to share their ideas. I think we can all benefit from it, the whole S&C community. What if you could give them some advice on how to get that work published? Yeah, what's your recipe, Chris?
um, Persistence? No. Uh, ultimately, listen, anyone can get a journal article published. I would say that you probably do need, um, it's going to sound such a vague comment, but you probably do need some sort of ability to write. And I think most people have the potential for that. Now, if you do a lot of reading through these journal articles anyway, the chances are that you're being privy and made accustomed to an academic style of writing already. So, you're probably a lot better at the writing aspect than you might even realize if you haven't attempted it before. I think the thought of writing definitely puts some people off. Um, if I give you, to go back to that first article I ever wrote, give you an example. And again, I might not be selling it that well when I tell this story, but that strength and conditioning for sprint swimming article. So at the back end of 2013, Anthony on my lectureship with him knew I was doing some work with swimmers. And I said, listen, maybe I could write this article. And he said, definitely go for it. So it turned out he made me submit 4 drafts to him before he even thought it was journal worthy, and then the truth of the matter is that obviously it went to Strength and Conditioning Journal. You have 2 reviewers. They looked at it, and they were very complimentary, but the list of changes they wanted was still monumental. So it required another 2 drafts after that. So I've done 6 drafts to, publish my first ever article. And I thought, gosh, is this really the process kind of thing? But that being said, the more you read, the more you practice, you just get, like anything, the hardest thing to do is get started, right? So the more you do of it, then, the better you become. So just to give the authors some understanding of how it works for different journals, each journal will have its own procedures, if you like. Okay, they like you to follow. So for articles that are aimed for the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research or the Strength and Conditioning Journal, there's a guidelines for authors section on the website. Okay, and it's on the editorial managers page of the NSCA website. Okay, so I would definitely encourage anyone who's considering wanting to write to go and read that. And I really wish I had read that before I tried to submit my first article, because I didn't. So please, please, please do. For people who are looking to publish in the Professional Strength and Conditioning Journal, that's the UKSCA journal, then authors can send their articles to Ian Jeffries, okay, who is the editor, and he will send out those articles for review. So Ian will have a team of extremely experienced practitioners and academics who will review the article that he sends them. And it's probably because they are, one of the leading authorities in that particular field or in that particular sport or on that particular topic. So the reviewer then goes over it, makes suggestions as to how the article can be improved, and then it gets sent back to the author where they can, make the changes that they see fit. And that's kind of how the process works. In terms of a secret recipe, I think it just probably comes down to, it's a process. You probably get better at it as you go along. The truth of the matter is that we've got, a few articles currently under review, us boys at Middlesex at the moment. So hopefully there'll be more coming out soon. But every article I write, I still send to Anthony before I submit to it. He's the most experienced of us all down at Middlesex, and I send it to him and I say, look, can you tear it apart and tell me what needs changing before I submit it? Because, he's going to have the best idea, really. So, always want to be surrounding yourself in this particular environment of trying to write articles with someone who's done more than you. And I guess you could say that, you want to surround yourself with people more experienced than you in almost any walk of life in this field, right? But it's the same principle with writing. I'll always send it to Anthony and he can look at it first. I'll make a few changes and then we submit and kind of go from there. But it gets easier as you do more of it. So I definitely encourage people to start. And if you do start, don't take your foot off the gas.
Well, sir, you just reminded me of a famous quote somewhere along the lines of, if you're the smartest guy in the room, then find another room, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was alluding to. I just couldn't think of the quote myself as I was saying it.
No, I'm awful at that. Normally I'll forget. Mate, that's really interesting. Thank you so much. If we take a short break there and then we'll come back and answer some shorter questions.
Okay, thanks very much.
No worries, man. Question time. This is the part of the show where I'll put a couple of regular questions to my guests regarding their morning routines, their go-to learning resources, their approach to influencing technical staff, and it's also your opportunity to ask a question, as I will pick one or two in advance from the ones that you send me. Okay, Chris, welcome back. I'm a big believer in creating a positive environment and being a positive influence. Do you personally have any rituals, such as morning routines or even just having a strong coffee, that you go through to ensure that you're in the best state of mind prior to working with athletes? And is this actually any different before you give a lecture?
Wow. Any rituals? Gosh, I think I'm probably going to be decisively boring on this one. I definitely have nothing really short of a coffee or a latte, just my shot of caffeine, really, like you said. But that's probably about it. It's probably there's probably much more interesting answers out there from many other people, but I think there probably are similarities. When we're delivering lectures, in the sense that from a lecturing standpoint. I will have probably updated, all my lecture content for each week throughout the summer when we're not teaching as much, with, some more up-to-date research. So the lecture content changes each year naturally as the research is constantly evolving. And I will familiarize myself with that particular week's topic in the build up to that lecture week, so that, I'm comfortable with the material again, or, I'm comfortable with the new material that I've put into the presentation. I think it just comes down to, from a lecturing standpoint, being prepared. And of course, you could argue that, couldn't you, when you're working with a team or any athletes? And that's probably just an unwritten rule as part of the job description. And if you're not, you're soon going to get found out. I think the same comes into hand with lecturing. I've got to be very familiar with the material. I need to make sure I know it like the back of my hand, so I'm not standing there, reading off of the slide. It's just a bullet point there to remind me, and I can then effectively, build on that point. As it comes to, working with athletes in a practical environment, if you are not prepared for what they want to do in that session, it's the same principle, really. You're soon going to get found out, aren't you? And that again comes down to that concept that we talked about earlier in terms of adaptability, and Duncan saying that this job is about people getting the most out of people. You might have to deal with an athlete who's just not feeling it that day, who just doesn't really want to put in much effort in the weight room. And you still got to figure out a way of getting the most out of them on a day when they just don't want to be in there, And that again comes down to, flexibility in your personality and adaptability. And, those are things that you can learn, but you can probably only learn them with experience, And I think the same thing comes down to when I'm lecturing with the students. I might deliver ultimately very similar content to what I did the previous year, but I can't guarantee that the questions that the students ask me are going to be the same. So they may throw, a real curveball at me where I have to kind of think on my feet, and, try and maybe say, and it's happened before, where because not everyone knows everything. I just end up saying to them, you know what? It's a really, really good question. I don't actually know the answer. My gut instinct is this, this, and this. But actually, what I'll do is I'll go away and, have a little read up for you, and I'll get back to you later on in the week when, we have the lab session or something like that. But in terms of the rituals, I think just being as prepared as you possibly can. I know that's such a boring answer, really. But I think that's what it comes down to for me personally.
No, it's not. I think that's great, and I think it's something that Richard Husseini actually went along a similar lines of just saying about the necessity to be really well organised. Obviously, for yourself, like know the subject area. No, that's great. Like, and obviously, what you're really trying to say, Chris, is that you're just such a positive guy, anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. And just oozing all that positive energy constantly.
I preach the same thing, mate. Honestly, I'm all about it. Okay, that's great. Thank you. So the second question, possibly one of the hardest parts of the job as an S&C coach, that is influencing other members of the support staff, especially the technical coaches. How do you deliver that message to your university students, and who do you have to influence in your job?
Oof, gosh, you're firing curveballs now, aren't you? Yeah, I completely agree. It can be extremely difficult aspects of the job influencing technical staff. I've probably got two answers to that, really. Number one is because you asked me about how I get this message across to our students, and particularly from an undergraduate perspective, the likelihood that our undergraduate students are holding very senior positions in strength and conditioning at professional organizations or at clubs or teams is probably quite low. In fact, it's probably none of them have got those senior positions, right? So if they need to influence technical staff, then there's definitely going to be a strong case that those people need to pick their battles, because the likelihood is that our undergraduate students are in what is most likely the lowest paid position at an academy, or they're on an internship, and so the level of responsibility is extremely low relative to the whole performance hierarchy scheme. So with that in mind, my only advice really would be, if you're absolutely positive that you've got some earth shattering information that, the coaches cannot live without, you need to back it up with some evidence. And that would be to say that, if in rugby or football you've noticed that one player's training load is substantially higher than the rest of the squads during training from the GPS data. And you also notice that their strength and power scores are considerably less, from their physical testing batteries. What you might want to consider doing, is going to your line manager, and just saying, look, what I've noticed is training loads are really, really high. His strength and power levels are considerably lower. This might be something that we need to consider in his program design. Otherwise, the likelihood is if we keep going down this route, not really monitoring this properly, then he might get injured. So I think by using, and this is, we've become very obsessed, haven't we, with people are collecting data for collecting data's sake. That's a real vogue, fashionable topic at the moment. What I would say is you could use the data in this particular instance as a hypothetical example to support your, I'm going to choose to say something in the right way to the technical staff, and just say, listen, likely it is if we don't do something about this, we run the risk of increasing an unnecessary injury or a non-contact injury for this player, and this is something we can avoid. And you're using that data then to support your claim, and it's then up to the technical staff if they want to listen to you or not. The second point to that is that I'm extremely lucky in the sense that with the GB junior sprinters that I work with, the technical coaches I'm on extremely great terms with, and it's, as I say, this job is about people helping people and relationships. And we've got to remember that, the athlete has got to be at the center of the equation, and the technical staff and the support staff surround them so that the athlete is always being put, as I said, at the center of the equation, because they're the most important, aspect of this equation. Now, like I said, I'm very lucky. My relationship with the technical staff in my experiences has always been very, very good. I've been very fortunate. I've heard plenty of stories of people having to deal with very, very difficult people. And I'm sure I will have to deal with difficult people further on down the line at some point. There's probably no way to avoid it, right? But the other technical support staff that I've had to deal with, particularly from the GB Sprint stuff, like Ryan at Oakland's College in St Albans, he's a head of athletics, and he's also, comes from a sort of British weightlifting background. So he has a very good understanding of weight room principles, as well as being, a technical sprints coach. Similarly, a person he works with, Jonas, who everyone is starting to know now because, he coaches Greg Rutherford, who just won gold yesterday, coaches CJ, who is, the fastest sprinter we have at the moment. Also our student at Middlesex, I might add. Jonas also, has a very good understanding of weight room principles and weight room development and does some of that stuff too. So I'm dealing with technical coaches who are also kind of dabbling in the weight room work as well. So it's very easy to put across, my principles, because I know, it's not going on deaf ears. They have an understanding of that stuff. So it's easier to have, I guess, more real conversations about that stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So just to kind of sum up, obviously you alluded to the point of supporting what you're trying to say with the important evidence or applicable evidence more than anything, and I guess having good relationships and approaching. You're lucky that your technical coaches can see things from your side, your point of view. But I guess on the flip side, maybe the message is to when you're approaching those technical coaches who can't see it from your point of view, who don't have that background knowledge in the weight room, perhaps approach it from their point of view.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's a very, very good summary, no doubt. I think you just got to, and it just comes down to probably how you put your point across as well, right? In the sense that if you approach it in the right manner and just say, ask to sit down with them and just say, look, I just wanted to, lend your ear for something just for a second, because I think there's something that, potentially we might be missing. And even so far as the body language that you use and actually what comes out of your mouth at that particular moment, if it's coming across in a very non-confrontational way, then you're probably not going to get your ear snapped off. They might just say, look, we'll do it later. I can't do it right now. Or they might say, yeah, sure. I'd like to hear what you've got to say. And the worst case scenario, if you have someone who is a little bit difficult, is they're just going to say, not right now, and they'll just say, come back later or something like that. But ultimately, it just has to be done in probably the most non-confrontational way ever, and that's probably going to give you the best chance of having what you think is important to be heard out. And if it turns out what you found is not important, then at least the technical staff will probably tell you why, and you're learning through the process anyway then, aren't you?
Yeah, totally. And then you're learning, just like what you said at the beginning, which battles to pick, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fantastic. Great answer. Thank you. Question 3, nice easy one here. If you can recommend just one website, one newsletter, one podcast, and one book to other S&C coaches, what would they be?
Yeah, good one. That comes down to the practical tools for the students that they can use, doesn't it? Website, I would probably have to say, personally, I would advise everyone, if they haven't done already, just to become a member of the National Strength and Conditioning Association website. Okay, nsca.com. It means you get access to the Strength and Conditioning Journal and the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. So the research journal will give you a new issue every month with probably somewhere within the region of 40 or 50 new articles. And the Strength and Conditioning Journal, excuse me, which is give you review papers or review publications, will come out every 2 months. So you'll get 6 issues a year. So there'll be plenty of reading to keep you busy. And for those that are more interested in the practical side of things, that then, of course, allows you to keep your hand in on the more theoretical standpoint, Podcast, I would probably say the Matt Dickens podcast. That's got to be some sort of shameless plug for the pair of us. But I would probably also have to say, um, so another member of staff who works for us at Middlesex University, who's launching a master's in sports nutrition this October, is Laurent Bannock, who runs a company called Guru Performance. And Laurent has his own sort of Guru Performance podcast. He's done quite a few now, and he does get some phenomenal speakers on there. And I mean, podcasts are fantastic, aren't they? And obviously, I'm saying that because I'm on a podcast with you. But they're a great way for people to learn. You know, you can listen to them driving to work, or you can just plug your earphones in and listen to them while you do whatever, walk somewhere, walk to the shops, do whatever you want to do. So it's a fantastic way of learning. So I think obviously yourself and Lawrence podcast would be fantastic. And I think the book, I guess it would be silly of me not to say that David Joyce and Dan Lewington book, which is all the rage, isn't it, of the latest textbook, which is the High Performance Training for Sports. That book has got some phenomenal authors in there, who've got some absolutely incredible experience in the field. I know Dan Baker's in there, Mike McGuigan. You've got debatably one of the best practitioners in the world who everyone wants to talk to in Dan Baker with his time at Brisbane Broncos. And then you've got someone who does do work, in the field, but is also a phenomenal professor, out in New Zealand, in Auckland, in Mike McGuigan. So you've got two very, 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 opposite ends of the spectrum, if you like, in terms of practical application and the theory side of things. And that's got a whole host of other authors. So probably that book, I would say.
Yeah. That's a great shout. I think that's fast becoming a competitor for the coveted title of the Bible of S&C, taken over from Super Training, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
I think Mel Siff's getting a bit of dust on his book, whilst David Joyce and Dan Lewington kind of get all the limelight these days.
Yeah, I think that's right, mate. Yeah, good shout.
No, it's a great book. It's a fantastic book. So question 4, finally, for all of the young and aspiring coaches out there, what would be your top piece of advice, or even what is the one passing message that you give to your students when they leave uni with the intention of landing a job in elite sport?
Oof, yeah, brilliant question, mate. Okay. All right. I don't think it's so much a parting message. I think I'm going to try and give this answer nice and succinctly. I think if it's a parting message when they leave uni, I think they're too late. Too late to the party, really. So I guess, truthfully, as you're a student, a full-time student, and the likelihood of you working a lot of hours alongside while studying as a student is probably quite low. So for that reason, I think it's essential that students try and make use of their holiday periods like summer and Christmas and Easter to get as much work experience as they possibly can. Now, internships is obviously quite a topic in its own right, isn't it? And has been for a few years in strength and conditioning, because it's quite a competitive field. But that being said, if you're a full-time student and you're not very experienced, then I think the key thing, excuse me, is to make as much use of your holiday period and get as much work experience within that 3 years as you possibly can. So your CV, really stands out from other graduates at the time that you're graduating. So if I'm leaving a parting message as they leave the third year, they've effectively, in my opinion, got to play 3 years of catch up. So a parting message really nowadays becomes as soon as they come into uni, this is your advice. It's up to them to act on it, and it's more a case of, listen, if I were you and I were in your position with how competitive it is, I would get myself, into some work experience at a professional club. Maybe you spend the first year, if it's feasible, working in football. If it's possible, you spend the second year working in rugby, and then, the third year working in something else, if the opportunities arise and if they are able to. Because otherwise, I think if they're having to do that by the time they've graduated, then they're playing catch up, and ultimately, they're having to delay their progression because they've had no experience, whilst they've been studying by whatever, a further 2 or 3 years, because most job specs want a good 3 years experience, don't they?
Yeah, like you say, it's just getting more and more competitive out there, and I think that's a great message. Like the foundational knowledge is obviously a huge part of it. It's a key piece of the puzzle, but there's probably several pieces more to the puzzle that you'll get from the practical experience, such as building relationships, managing personalities, applying that knowledge, which is pretty damn important.
Yeah, yeah.
Coaching movement skills, learning what type of athletes respond best to what type of stimulus or what type of communication. You're right. There's obviously so much to it. I think that's a great message to plug throughout their development, throughout their time of uni. Yeah, well done.
Lovely.
Okay, Chris, thanks so much. So we wrap up by just telling people where we can find you on social media. It's Twitter, for example.
Yeah, Twitter. My Twitter name, as it were, is at Ocho1982, OCHO 1982. So you can find me there. So yeah, please, by all means, give us a follow. If you've got any questions, just give us a message. I'll be more than happy to get back to you.
If anyone's looking to get their research published or a review article or anything, then you're going to be inundated with emails now. Chris, can you review this first before I send it off to Ian Jeffries? Or
No, mate, I'd be more than happy to do that. Doing plenty of that at the moment. We're about to have the master's students, the MSc S&C guys, about to hand in their dissertations in about 6 days' time. So there's plenty of panic emails coming my way each day saying, oh, can you just read this section and make sure? But it's part of the job. And if I'm honest with you, I love doing it. So it's fine.
That's great. And you obviously love writing too. So I'm looking forward to seeing your next article out there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Chris. I'll see you soon, mate.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
The relevant reading section is aimed to highlight one article that I've either read or written and believe is worth sharing with you guys. It may be peer-reviewed or it might not be, but I will make sure it's relevant to coaches looking to develop and always get better. As Chris has already plugged Davey Joyce and Dan Lewinden's High Performance Training for Sports book, I thought I'd discuss an important chapter and, similarly to the last episode, give you a little insight into how I apply those principles into the program here in Andorra. So the chapter I want to discuss is the final chapter of the book, Recovering Effectively in High Performance Sports, written by Christian Cook, Liam Kilduff and Mark Jones. If I wanted to hear from anyone on this subject, it would certainly be those authors. I heard Ashley Jones recently say that an athlete's ability to train is dictated by their ability to recover. This is spot on, and I think I even tweeted the quote. So learning about recovery and implementing optimal strategies in your environment will definitely enhance your training program. The chapter itself starts by discussing the physiological characteristics of fatigue and recovery. So muscle damage, effects on the nervous systems and hormonal systems, before detailing many common recovery methods that practitioners might use to help alleviate this fatigue or return to optimal performance, such as the use of cold water immersion, cryotherapy, active recovery, etc., as well as when these are applicable. Throughout the chapter, there are several mentions to the importance of sleep, nutrition, and hydration. Perhaps it's a bit obvious, but I personally would have placed these at the front of the chapter with the utmost importance. Maybe even elaborated more in these areas too, as this is where the greatest gains in recovery are going to be made. No point wearing compression garments for 12 hours if you only sleep for 6. Not taking anything away from the authors at all though, their importance was still clear, just placing it before the other protocols, in my personal opinion, could have made a little more impact. The chapter does detail several example protocols for each method of recovery that have been found to be effective. With regards to cold water immersion or contrast water therapy, it's important to note that one of the main causes for improved recovery will be down to the hydrostatic pressure. So the temperature of the water may not actually be so important. In fact, immersed in really cold temperatures for an extended period of time could actually be detrimental to both recovery and performance. Also, it is advised that during periods of adaptation, additional recovery protocols should be limited. For example, satellite cell activation and proliferation is essential in the recovery and remodeling of muscle tissue. This can be reduced by decreased temperatures and faster removal of muscle lactate, which wouldn't be ideal during preparatory phases when we're looking to maximize those gains. On the flip side, implementing effective recovery protocols is essential during periods of competition when freshness to compete is paramount. What I like the most throughout the whole chapter is the attention to the individuality of responses to recovery protocols, the importance of perception, and the link between physiological and psychological recovery. Whether or not ice baths benefit performance is pretty irrelevant. If the athlete thinks it has a positive impact, then it probably will, and I certainly won't argue. So, more specifically with the program here, I focus my efforts on sleep, nutrition, and hydration. As I don't supervise my athletes 24/7, I think education is massively important in the area of recovery. I find Jan Lemur's sports infographics, especially those on sleep, really useful to portray the benefits in a simple way, and I'm particularly happy that he has highlighted the negative impacts of using smartphones or tablets before bed. My athletes happen to have a continual stream of the same few posters going through their Facebook accounts. Above wellness questionnaires and monitoring training loads, conversation is my number one tool in monitoring where an athlete's at. So asking about sleep quality and duration are frequent questions of mine. The best part about working on the border of Spain is that siestas are a part of the culture here. So everyone's more than comfortable with taking naps to top up their sleep time. Regarding nutrition, real food always comes first. It's a continual process, especially with youngsters who love sugar, but the technical coaches have recently commented regarding our last camp at how much more conscious the athletes are about what they eat this year. So that certainly backs up my feeling that we've made a lot of progress. Furthermore, whilst it's certainly a real food first policy, we are extremely fortunate to be supported by Reflex Nutrition, who I honestly believe are one of the highest quality sports supplement companies on the market. It's not just the likes of post-workout nutrition that's important for us, but in a sport that chases the winter all year round without always being guaranteed the quality of good food, vitamin D and other nutrients are essential supplementation. During the summer, we have a very long pre-season interspersed with various training camps, either on a glacier in the Alps or down in South America. When we're here in Andorra, we usually have a recovery day on a Wednesday, which involves an hour's yoga session in the morning, followed by some light swimming and optional steam room, hot tubs, or cold baths. The main direction is to relax and do whatever makes you feel best. For the ones who ask me for the optimal protocol, I'll often suggest 2 to 3 minutes cold, 4 to 5 minutes hot, 3 to 4 times. But if they don't ask, I'm not going to stress them by telling them what to do. Most of them are teenagers or thereabouts after all. In season, or when we're on long camps, we utilize an active recovery protocol every day between training days to stimulate blood flow and the removal of lactate. Unless, of course, we're in the gym for a strength session anyway. These recovery sessions vary. Before I joined the team, afternoon recovery was already habitual and always done on a stationary bike. For me, having the habit already there was the best place to start, and sitting on a bike is a great, easy way to increase blood flow to the legs. Personally, though, I'm just not a huge fan of using the bike all the time, mostly for postural reasons, and I just feel that sometimes we can use that time a lot more productively. Sitting on a bike kind of mimics the bad, I say that in inverted commas, postures needed to ski, such as a flexed thoracic, and does nothing really to activate the glutes or lengthen the psoas, for example. So after a long travel, we'll always go for a light jog, do some glute activation, and stretch the hamstrings and psoas. Then, between days of skiing, the guys have a couple of active recovery circuits that I can actually put up on the website if you're interested. They mostly involve more beneficial exercises towards mobility and posture so that we can use that time productively. For example, it will normally start with a sun salutation, include some spinal and hip mobility exercises in a bit of a flow type pattern, like a squat to walk out to spider with rotation, probably some ankle mobility, glute activation, and finish with the stony stretch. I feel that enables the benefits of active recovery through stimulating blood flow whilst working on the specific needs of the athletes, much like an effective warm up should. Then on some days, they'll have the option of just sitting on the bike as it's absolute minimal stress. And when we're based in France through January, February, and some of March, we're lucky enough to have a swimming pool on site. So I'll always plug 20 minutes of movement in water as the best option. Whether that involves swimming, chucking a ball around, or the boys play fighting, I really don't mind. I think that's a little bit about the book, hopefully leaving plenty of gaps for you to go out and buy it and read it for yourselves, and then a fair insight into our various recovery protocols at various times of the alpine ski season here. Hope you found it useful. Now it's time to discuss personal development. In this section, I'll let you know of any up-and-coming courses or conferences that I'm aware of. I'll also let you know of any decent jobs or internships that might be out there at the moment. Firstly, I need to start by mentioning that all of Chris's articles are up on researchgate.net. So you can download those for free, and it's also a really valuable tool to access other research. This week, I'm mostly going to mention new opportunities, but I'll put all the links from previous weeks up on my website too, including the upcoming workshops from the likes of Darren Roberts and John Noonan in October, the one with Jonas Dodu in November, and opportunities at Altis or the World Athletics Centre over in the States. First bit of CPD today then comes in the form of a website called chandu.org. That's CHANDOO.org. It's a seriously great website if you want to learn how to create all kinds of Excel dashboards. I really think it's great for making data more presentable, so check out chandu.org. Next is an online course, The Introduction to Sports Psychology for Beginners, from the guys over at Believe Perform. I've just started this course. I think it's fantastic, really good content, so check that out too. Also online, Fergus Connolly has just shared his slides from a recent presentation on managing information and technology in elite team sport. I definitely recommend checking that out too. A little further afield now, over in the States, Cal Dietz and Martin Bingisser are holding a sport-specific training seminar, which looks packed full of really good content. That's on October the 10th at the National Sports Centre in Blaine, Minnesota. Then over in New Zealand, you've got the Sprins, S&C and Youth Athlete Development Conference featuring the likes of Dr. John Oliver and Nick Gill, among others, and that's from the 18th to the 20th of November at AUT University. Finally, around the same time, from the 16th to the 20th of November at the Canadian Sports Institute in Calgary comes the Strength and Power Performance course led by Matt Jordan. Judging by Matt's recent appearance on the Pacey Performance podcast, I'm sure that will also be more than worthwhile. As for internships, I hope some of you got your application in for the one at Greater Western Sydney Giants that was on the last podcast. A really great opportunity to be part of a top program. Staying in Australia, there's now one based in the NRL with Cronulla Sharks. You want to check out the ASCA website for that one. In New Zealand, there's currently an opportunity going with High Performance Sport New Zealand, who are offering an internship. Also, the United States Olympic Committee are accepting applications for their S&C mentorship starting in January 2016. If you're interested, you'll need to send your resume to timothy.pellet@usoc.org. And finally, coming back to the UK, there's a work experience position with Middlesex County Cricket at the moment. Finally, to finish up with jobs then, there is an S&C coach job going at Motherwell Football Club. St Mary's University are looking for a full-time lecturer in strength and conditioning science. GSK Human Performance Lab are looking for a principal scientist in physiology and movement analysis. Sydney Swans are after a new head strength coach, which sounds like a great opportunity to be a part of the AFL. And there's an assistant S&C coach job available with High Performance Sport New Zealand. That will be based in Wellington. That's all for this episode. You can find all these links based on my website. As a final point, I'd like to say thanks for the feedback so far. I'm personally learning loads and hoping that the podcast only gets better with each episode. Thanks for listening and catch you again soon. Thanks for listening to the World Class Coaching Podcast. You can catch me on Twitter at MattDickinsSC. The show notes for each episode will be up on the blog over at purehealthpuresport.co.uk, and obviously subscribe to the World Class Coaching Podcast on iTunes or wherever it is that you prefer to listen. Keep pushing forward your development and tune in again soon.